Hello and welcome to the Gaggle What We Challenge, and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely, and I just want to record a podcast on this conflict that has now emerged between the two presidents, between the current president Donald Trump and former President Obama. So, as you know, President Trump the other day suggested that former President Obama had engaged in treasonous conduct in launching a hoax against him, the successor president, and essentially perpetrating a lie in order to destroy the presidency of Donald Trump. Um, and President Obama responded to that, and we're going to take a look at that. And of course, the media have rushed in to defend President Obama, the sainted Obama, their hero, with a thoroughly disingenuous defense, according to which, Obama had never suggested that Russia had hacked into the voting machines. Obama had never suggested that vote tallies had in any way been affected by Russia, and so therefore it was absolutely ridiculous to start accusing Obama of perpetrating any hoax. This, of course, uh, conveniently forgets what actually happened, what Obama and the Obama people uh, perpetrated during the 2016 election, and what they set in motion, which was to uh, absolutely poison political life in the United States for years to come, and poison international relations, particularly in terms of relations between the United States and Russia. It led directly to the war in Ukraine, and the media, who played a very major role in all this, deliberately obfuscate things by shifting the debate onto this very obscure question of, well, did Obama suggest that Russia had hacked into the voting machine? Did Obama suggest that Russia had faked vote tallies? No. What Obama did was perpetrate that hoax, the hoax that first Russia interfered in the US election. Second, that Russia had interfered in the US election with a view to securing an election victory for Donald Trump. And third, that Donald Trump and the people around him were working for Russia, had colluded with Russia in stealing the 2016 election. That all stems from Obama. And just let's keep in mind, July 2016, CIA Director John Brennan goes to President Obama and tells him that Hillary Clinton, candidate Hillary Clinton, in order to shift attention away from her email server problems, is putting together a fake story about Trump-Russia collusion. He had got this information, and he disclosed this to President Obama, that this is coming from the Hillary Clinton camp, that they're putting out the story of collusion between Trump and Russia. And Barack Obama did not say, well, we need to really make sure that this is stopped here and now. This is serious stuff. Instead, Barack Obama seized on this and joined in this plan to create this notion, which was to have enormous influence for the next 10 years, that President Trump, he was then candidate Trump, was working for the Russians. That's July 2016. So Obama essentially joins forces with Hillary Clinton. And then, remember, July 2016 is also the time when the FBI, for reasons that have never been explained, suddenly launches Operation Crossfire Hurricane, supposedly to investigate collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. This was so egregious, what Peter Strzok of the FBI did, that even John Durham in his report said that this violated almost every norm of investigative process because they had no basis whatever to launch such an investigation. And instead of following normal procedures, such as look in the FBI database, see if there's any record of Trump or people around Trump having any connections to Russia, instead of going to the Russia specialists and get input from them about this, Peter Strzok just simply opened this investigation. So that's July 2016. And then, as we'll see, December 2016, Obama launches this scare story, this fraud about the election. This is 1 month after the election. That election had been tampered with by Russia, and instructs his top intelligence chiefs, especially John Brennan, but also the DNI, James Clapper, to come up with an intelligence community assessment that will indeed say that Russia interfered in the 2016 election, which obviously affected the outcome of the 2016 election in favor of Donald Trump. And then in January 2017, again, Obama, when quite irresponsibly, the FBI in 2016 had launched an investigation into Trump's national security advisor, the man designated to be Trump's national security advisor, General Michael Flynn. The FBI had launched an investigation, again, on spurious grounds that he supposedly had a mistress who was a Russian and had Russian connection. Total fraud, complete hoax. It was done in order to frame Flynn. In January 2017, the FBI had reached the conclusion that there's just simply no basis to investigate Flynn on grounds that he's supposedly a Russian agent. The story of this Russian girlfriend was nonsense. And it was Obama, who instructed the FBI to continue investigating Michael Flynn on the dubious, spurious, fraudulent, groundless, deceitful grounds that he had violated the Logan Act by speaking on the phone with Russian Ambassador Kislyak, a conversation in which he had urged the Russians not to overreact to Obama's sanctions and Obama's expulsion of Russian diplomats and Obama's seizure of Russian diplomatic compounds. So as you can see, at each critical moment of RussiaGate, and I'm sure there are others, Obama is always there to play a decisive role. And yet the media want to pretend that he's somehow this scholarly gentleman figure who was really trying to get to the bottom of what happened in the 2016 election. So first of all, let's take a look at what Trump said during that news conference with Philippine President Marcos. And this is what he said about Obama.
Absolutely cold, Tulsi Gabbard. What they did to this country in 2016, starting in 2016, but going up all the way going up to 2020 in the election. They tried to rig the election and they got caught. And there should be very severe consequences for that. You know, when we caught Hillary Clinton, I said, you know what? Let's not go too far here. It's the ex-wife of a president, and I thought it was sort of terrible. And I let her off the hook, and I'm very happy I did. But it's time to start after what they did to me, and whether it's right or wrong, it's time to go after people. Obama's been caught directly. So people say, oh, you know, a group. It's not a group. It's Obama. His orders are on the paper. The papers are signed. The papers came right out of their office. They sent everything to be highly classified. Well, the highly classified's been released. And what they did in 2016 and in 2020 is very criminal. It's criminal at the highest level. So that's really the things you should be talking about. I know nothing about the other, but I think it's appropriate that they do go.
I asked you about that.
Yeah.
Submitted a criminal referral to the Department of Justice. From your perspective, who should the DOJ target as part of their investigation? What specific figures in the economy?
Well, based on what I read, and I read pretty much what you read, it would be President Obama. He started it. And Biden was there with him, and Comey was there, and Clapper, the whole group was there. Brennan, they were all there in a room. Right here, this was the room. This is much more beautiful than it was then, but that's okay. I have nice pictures up. They came out of the vaults. They were in there for 100 years. This is much more beautiful. We have the Declaration of Independence now in the room, which wasn't here. I guess people didn't feel too good about putting it here, but I do. But you know what? If you look at those papers, they have them stone cold, and it was President Obama. It wasn't lots of people all over the place. It was them too. But the leader of the gang was President Obama, Barack Hussein Obama. Have you heard of him? And except for the fact that he gets shielded by the press for his entire life, that's the one they look. He's guilty. It's not a question. You know, I like to say, let's give it time. It's there. He's guilty. This was treason. This was every word you can think of. They tried to steal the election. They tried to obfuscate the election. They did things that nobody's ever even imagined, even in other countries. You've seen some pretty rough countries. This man has seen some pretty rough countries, but you've never seen anything like it. And we have all of the documents. And from what Tulsi told me, she's got thousands of additional documents coming. So President Obama, it was his concept, his idea, but he also got it from crooked Hillary Clinton. Crooked is a $3 bill. Hillary Clinton and her group, the Democrats, spent $12 million.
So that's the he makes it clear he is accusing Obama of treason. And of course, Obama then was obligated to respond to this attack. And here is his response. Here's the Washington Post. Obama's office, Trump administration's treason claims are a distraction. And Patrick Rodenbush, a spokesman for Obama, said in a statement that while the office does not normally dignify the constant nonsense and misinformation flowing out of this White House with a response, the administration's new bizarre and ridiculous allegations warranted one. Nothing in the document issued last week undercuts the widely accepted conclusion that Russia worked to influence the 2016 presidential election, but did not successfully manipulate any votes These findings were affirmed in a 2020 report by the bipartisan Senate Intelligence Committee led by then Chairman Marco Rubio, referring to Trump's Secretary of State. Now, of course, when we talks about the conclusion that Russia worked to influence the 2016 presidential election, that conclusion is a conclusion drawn by that very intelligence community assessment that was manufactured by Obama and Brennan and Clapper. Everyone else was simply repeating what that intelligence community assessment declared. And they had no basis for their assessment. And that assessment proved to be very influential on American public life. The media ran with it, but everything else, like what the bipartisan Senate Intelligence Committee, they had no information. They had no separate information other than what was provided to them by the intelligence community. That's all they have. They don't have, their own investigative resources. They don't see raw intelligence. They rely on what's provided to them by the intelligence agencies. Same goes with Mueller. So when you read these newspaper stories, they say, "Oh, well, this was confirmed by the Mueller report." Mueller had no basis other than what was told to him by the intelligence community assessment. And here, if you just look at, if you go to the document that was published last week by Tulsi Gabbard, she goes back to September 9th, 2016. And she says an ODNI and PDB official, so there's Director of National Intelligence and Presidential Daily Briefing official, says that an upcoming presidential daily briefing would make clear that Russia probably is not trying to influence the election by using cyber means to target election infrastructure. And then several intelligence community officials agree Russia probably is not going to be able to influence the election by using cyber means to manipulate computer-enabled election infrastructure. But let's keep in mind that's all that matters. Because when it comes to influence, well, you can't stop other countries from influencing elections. Now, if one thinks of the 2016 elections, hard to think of anyone or any country that played more of a role in influencing that election than Great Britain, since it was a senior figure within MI6, namely Christopher Steele, who wrote the Steele dossier, which made all those outlandish claims about Trump-Russia collusion. That's where the origin of the Trump-Russia collusion in that Steele dossier. And he was a senior figure within MI6. And that document was to play a major role in that election. The FBI seized on that document and offered Steele, I think, $1 million to find corroborating evidence. And the FBI used Igor Danchenko, who was supposedly the source for the Steele dossier, to essentially use him as a confidential human source. Paid him a lot of money. FBI paid him a lot of money as a confidential human source and kept him hidden from congressional investigators. So the FBI was actively involved with the Steele dossier, actively involved with Christopher Steele. He paid Christopher Steele as as expert, paid Igor Danchenko, Steele's main informant, and was using this in order to go after Donald Trump. It used the Steele dossier to file FISA warrants against a Trump official, namely Carter Page. And he did this knowing that the Steele dossier was the product of the Hillary Clinton campaign. Hillary Clinton paid for that Steele dossier. Now, then we have the lead author of the presidential daily briefing agreed. We agree Russia probably is not and will not try to influence the election by using cyber means to manipulate computer-enabled election infrastructure. And then they say, yes, if we go going further, while Russia has some capability to conduct cyber manipulation of election infrastructure, we judge that efforts by them or others to change the outcome of an election through cyber means would be detected. And then we assess that foreign adversaries, notably Russia, are more likely to focus their cyber operations on undermining credibility, public confidence. That assessment feeds directly into the influence operations, cyber-enabled, that we're seeing related to current and historic election cycles. Now, why that's important is that, as we'll see, the, the intelligence community assessment that Brennan published in January 2017 did not say that Russian focus was on trying to undermine the credibility, public confidence in the election, but on the contrary, Russia interfered in the 2016 election to secure an election victory for Donald Trump. It preferred Donald Trump to Hillary Clinton. And then here's September the 12th, 2016. The intelligence community publishes an ICA, so that's the first of the ICAs, on cyber threats to the election. The report finds foreign adversaries do not have and will probably not obtain the capabilities to successfully execute widespread and undetected cyber attacks. And then this was again, it goes into the details of the September 2016 cyber threats to the election. And then here are the key insights. We judge that foreign adversaries do not have and will probably not obtain the capabilities to successfully execute widespread and undetected cyber attacks, and so on. And then the most likely cyber threat to the election is from low-level detectable cyber intrusions and attacks that cause localized disruption, but do not threaten the overall functionality of the election services or infrastructure. And then nonetheless, even the perception that such low-level intrusions and attacks have occurred risks undermining public confidence in the legitimacy of the electoral process, the validity of the election's outcome, and the mandate of the winning candidate. And then we judge Russia has conducted cyber and intelligence operation that suggests that it has potential interest in disrupting the US presidential election. Kremlin's cyber penetration of a US political party's servers and the timing of the probable subsequent leak of stolen data suggests that Russia is motivated to exploit the period surrounding the US presidential election, either to try to shape the US political environment or to advance Russian interests. For example, Putin might simply wish to make the US electoral process appear illegitimate or to undermine the legitimacy of the president-elect in order to strengthen Moscow's hand. Now, what's interesting here is, then it goes on again, adversaries interested in voter count might be encouraged by open questioning and so on. But what was interesting, that this all goes back to the supposed hack of the DNC server. And I say supposed because it wasn't until later that we found out, first of all, that there was never really any evidence that the DNC servers were hacked. This came out during testimony before the House Intelligence Committee. That the report about the supposed Russian hack came from CrowdStrike, that had been commissioned and paid for by the DNC, that Sean Henry from CrowdStrike had said he had no evidence that the Russians had exfiltrated information from the DNC server. He just simply surmised that the Russians were behind it, but he had no direct evidence of this. He said this in secret House Intelligence Committee hearings. But as we also learned later, the FBI never actually examined the DNC servers. The FBI relied exclusively on the say-so of CrowdStrike. And then, as we later learned again, is that CrowdStrike really never presented the FBI with any kind of evidence at all. So not only did the FBI not itself take a look at the servers, the FBI was content with a wholly inadequate report from CrowdStrike. And yet that was the basis for the claims, oh, we know definitively that it was the Russians who hacked into the DNC servers. So here, this is from the September the 12th. This is the intelligence community assessment. It says, we assess that the Russian services probably orchestrated at least some of the disclosures of DNC and DCCC documents from June to August 2016. Notice the very tentative, well, they orchestrated it, or whatever orchestrate means, and at least some of the disclosures. Our assessment is based on the timing of the disclosure. So it's the timing of this, not on any direct physical evidence, the timing of the disclosures, and the fact that Russian intelligence was in possession of leaked information from both DNC and DCC, and that the online persona Guccifer 2.0 claimed to have provided. But that's just simply going around in circles. They've already assumed that this person was working for the Russians. They've already assumed that these sites were working for the Russians, and so they said, "Oh well, we draw the conclusion the Russians must have been responsible because they had the documents and they provided the documents to their supposed agents." I mean, this is real circular reasoning, and particularly egregious in that Julian Assange of WikiLeaks had explicitly said that it wasn't the Russians who provided him with the information. And then even this intelligence community assessment said FBI and NSA, however, have low confidence in the attribution of the data leaks to Russia. That's the NSA. The NSA is the one agency of the US government that's in a position to know whether something has been hacked and whether this information was being exfiltrated from the DNC to the services of Russia. And if the NSA says we have low confidence, which is nothing, we have low confidence in the attribution of the data leaks to Russia, they agree that the disclosures appear consistent with what we might expect from Russian influence activities, but note that we lack sufficient technical details to correlate the information posted online to Russian state-sponsored actors. In other words, they have nothing. The whole, essentially, the golden goose of RussiaGate was the supposed hack of the DNC server, and that it was Russia that hacked the DNC server, and that it was Russia that provided this information to WikiLeaks and then this Guccifer 2.0. And as we see, and this was hidden, this was absolutely hidden, and only really emerged in these documents published by Tulsi Gabbard, that the FBI and NSA had low confidence in attributing that hack to Russia. But it says 2 days later, the IC published the aforementioned PDB with near identical findings. It finds that foreign adversaries do not have the capability to covertly overturn the vote outcome. And then on October the 7th, 2016, and this is where the lie really goes into high gear, because despite the low confidence of the FBI and the low confidence of the NSA when it comes to this hack of the DNC servers by Russia, so a joint statement is issued by DNI Clapper and Homeland Secretary Jay Johnson. It's on October the 7th. And they state with confidence the Russian government directed the DNC and DCCC hacks. And then, as rightly Mrs. Tulsi says, the statement omitted the fact that the FBI and NSA had low confidence in attributing the data leaks from these entities to Russia. And here was the statement. I mean, it's a long time ago, so just as a refresher, what it is that Clapper and Johnson stated: the U.S. intelligence community is confident that the Russian government directed the recent compromises of emails from U.S. persons and institutions, including from U.S. political organizations, the recent disclosures of alleged hacked emails on sites like DC Leaks and WikiLeaks, and by the Guccifer 2.0 online persona, are consistent with the methods and motivations of Russian-directed efforts. Now, you always have to remember, whenever they use this language, consistent with the methods and motivations, I mean, they have nothing. You don't have any evidence. It's like saying, well, it's consistent with what we might expect from really evil, monstrous people like the Russians. So yeah, that's kind of what we would expect from them. Yeah, it's consistent with their methods and motivations. So we're really, again, the circular argument. We know the Russians are bad. We know, or we attribute to them certain methods and motivations. So whatever we come across, oh, that's very like the methods and motivations of the Russians. So therefore, it must be the Russians. That's the logic being used here. These thefts and disclosures are intended to interfere with the US election process. Such activity is not new to Moscow. The Russians have used similar tactics and techniques across Europe and Eurasia, for example, to influence public opinion there. We believe, based on the scope and sensitivity of these efforts, that only Russia's senior-most officials could have authorized these activities. So this was an outrageous interference in the election. This is just 1 month out from the 2016 election, and they've come along with this statement. They have no basis for it. As we said, there was no forensic evidence to show that this hack of the DNC was perpetrated by the Russians, or that the Russians came into possession of this information, or that the Russians passed this information on to WikiLeaks or whatever. So this is all of this, which was clearly designed to interfere in the 2016 election. This is essentially just made up. And made up in defiance of their own intelligence people. Anyway, this is back to the Tulsi document. It says December the 7th, 2016. So we're now 1 month out from the election. The IC is working on a new presidential daily briefing examining the potential impact of cyber hacks on the election results. And then DNI Clapper's office develops talking points based on the PDB's findings. Foreign adversaries did not use cyber attacks on election infrastructure to alter the US presidential election outcome. We have no evidence of cyber manipulation of election infrastructure intended to alter results. So basically, they were going to come along and say, yeah, the election was pretty much on the level. That was going to be their presidential daily briefing. Now, as we'll see, this was not at all to the liking of Obama. So here we have, again, from DNI, and it says, we assess foreign adversaries did not use cyber attacks and so on. We have no evidence of cyber manipulation of election infrastructure. And then we can see that this is again that we assess that foreign adversaries did not use the. This is still coming from the DNI, their office. We assess that foreign adversaries did not use cyber attacks on election infrastructure to alter the U.S. presidential election. And then they say there was, however, minimal targeting of election infrastructure, probably by cyber criminals, not the Russian government, just cyber criminals, to steal data, although these efforts did not disrupt the election. And then December the 8th, intelligence community officials discussed the draft presidential daily briefing, which finds that Russian and criminal actors did not impact recent U.S. election results by conducting malicious cyber activities against election infrastructure. The group also decides the presidential daily briefing will be published the following day due to high administration interest. So that's this following day, that's December the 9th, 2016. But instead, and then, again, this is we have the DNC intrusion. Again, they now suddenly they have U.S. intelligence community has high confidence in attribution of the intrusions, and I said based on forensic evidence identified by a private cyber firm. So they're making this claim, having first declared rightly that, hey, we have low confidence. So now they're saying, oh, we have high confidence in attributing this to Russia based on the forensic evidence identified by a private cyber firm, which is, of course, CrowdStrike. But they had nothing from CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike hadn't published any kind of a detailed report and had not provided a detailed report to the FBI. So they had nothing other than the say-so of CrowdStrike when they said, yeah, we think it was the Russians that did it. And as I said, they eventually admitted under oath, testifying in secret before the House Intelligence Committee, that CrowdStrike, really had no direct evidence that the Russians were behind the DNC hack. And then most IC agencies assess with moderate confidence that Russian services probably orchestrated at least some of the disclosures of U.S. political information. Almost meaningless, at least some of the disclosures of U.S. political information. Our level of confidence is based on the timing of the Russian intelligence was in possession of leaked information from both DNC and DCC. But you can see again the circular argument. How do they know the Russians were in possession of this information? Well, because Guccifer 2.0 had this information. Well, how do you know Guccifer 2.0 was the Russians? Well, we kind of assume that he was the Russian. So, and then the WikiLeaks. Well, how do you know WikiLeaks? WikiLeaks denied that they got it from the Russians. Well, of course, there are Russian cutouts. They just make these assumptions and just follow a kind of circular argument. And anyway, this was then they were supposed to hold this meeting for the presidential daily briefing, and then lo and behold, there is no presidential daily briefing, and it says a few hours later, after initially co-authoring the presidential daily briefing, the FBI, led by Comey, inexplicably withdraws from coordinating on the product and notifies the other intelligence community officials that the FBI will be drafting a dissent. Later in the afternoon, a senior presidential daily briefing official kills the PDB based on some new guidance. Well, we want to know, what was this new guidance? They were about to do a daily briefing in which they said, really, Russia hadn't altered, or at least it had a minimal impact on the election. The results were what they would have been, Russia or no Russia. And now suddenly, this is altered. and based on some new guidance. And then we have the post-election PDB, which once again assessed that Russia did not hack the election, was never published. So that innocuous PDB that the intelligence community was planning to publish was shelved. And instead, we had this big meeting in the White House. The Obama White House gathers top cabinet officials for a National Security Council Principals Committee meeting. And, everybody's there. So in the chair is National Security Advisor Susan Rice. Clapper is there. John Kerry, Secretary of State, is there. Andrew McCabe from the FBI is there. John Brennan, of course, is there. And then we have Loretta Lynch, Attorney General, is there. Mary McCord, also from the Justice Department, is there. Avril Haines is there. Lisa Monaco is there. Ben Rhodes is there. Jay Johnson is there. And then, so they still haven't published any finding, but there's a summary of conclusions that principals agreed to deny Russia the use of its residential and recreational compound at Pioneer Port on the Chesapeake Bay. So they're already punishing Russia before any kind of a finding has been published or indeed even written. The presidential finding that was written by Brennan wasn't to be they didn't start drafting it till sometime later, but already they're punishing Russia. So in fact, already the conclusion preceded the report. This was obviously the conclusion that Obama wanted, and he did this conclusion that Obama wanted, which is why they came to this, drew this conclusion, the punishment of Russia before any report, before any finding, because Obama wanted to sabotage any possible rapprochement between Russia and the United States. So Trump would come into office with this drastic deterioration of relations, and particularly the Russians were bound to be upset about losing their residential and recreational compound where the diplomats and their families tended to enjoy their holidays. And the Russians were likely to take retaliatory measures against the United States, and that, of course, would upset Trump and all the people coming into office. And so we have the principles also recommended, pending the views of the U.S. mission to the UN and legal review, denying Russia the use of its residential and recreational compound in Glen Cove, New York. So they're trying to hit the Russia's residential recreational compound used by its diplomats assigned to the United Nations. The Department of State noted its preference that any action against the compounds be delayed to, among others, allow for potential agreement on Aleppo to be implemented. So yeah, by fine, punish Russia, but we need Russian help on Syria. So we want to use the Russians for our purposes. So please just hold off for a little bit on seizing the diplomatic compounds. And then principals concurred with a number of measures state proposed to take with respect to Russian visas, and then so on, making the issuance of visas difficult, and the rest. They're talking about for state and FBI will draft for further legal and policy review a proposal for removing a number of suspected Russian intelligence officers in the United States, and that, of course, happened. They were expelled, and then principals agreed to recommend sanctioning of certain members of the Russian military intelligence and foreign intelligence chains of command responsible for cyber operations as a response to cyber activity that attempted to influence or interfere with U.S. elections. Again, all of this is based on this nonsensical fairy tale about the Russian supposed hack of the DNC servers, because there's nothing else here about any cyber operation. They said, yeah, there's no cyber operations. No one touched the voting machine. No one touched the state registries. No one did anything to affect the vote count. No one, got into all these, offices with the people's IDs and addresses and whatever. And they're going ahead with this punishment, knowing that this is really going to hobble the incoming Trump administration. And then he says, this is again Tulsi Gabbard's document. It says that same day, deep state officials in the intelligence community began leaking blatantly false intelligence to the Washington Post, as proven by the unpublished presidential daily briefing and previous intelligence community products, claiming that Russia used cyber means to influence the outcome of the election. And so this is what they fed to the Washington Post. Though Russia has long conducted cyber spying on U.S. agencies, companies, and organizations, this presidential campaign marks the first time Russia has attempted through cyber means to interfere in, if not actually actively influence, the outcome of an election. This was in the Washington Post, fed to them by the Obama administration, that they knew was a lie. Later that evening, another leak to the Washington Post falsely alleged that the CIA concluded in a secret assessment that Russia intervened in the election to help President Trump. And this is from the Washington Post. The CIA has concluded in a secret assessment that Russia intervened in the 2016 election to help Donald Trump win the presidency, rather than just undermine the confidence in the US electoral system. So remember, that's what the intelligence people had said. They said, yeah, Russia's just interfering in order to undermine confidence. No, and now the story is changing and say, oh, no, they intervene in order to help Trump. Obviously with a view to hobbling Trump, because anything he does will be seen to be, in some ways, a repayment to Russia. And of course, Trump went out of his way not to do anything that might seem as if he had any kind of a goodwill towards Russia. And then at that point, there is no official IC assessment that contains that conclusion. There's no IC assessment. There's been no intelligence community assessment at all about this. And then December the 14th, 2016, intelligence community officials again leaked to the media, this time claiming that intelligence community officials believe with a high level of confidence that Russian President Vladimir Putin was personally involved in the US election hack. Amazing. It got personally involved. That they have agents so high up in the Kremlin, so dug in, that they could determine that President Putin personally got involved in the US election. And then we have December the 16th, 2016, though President Obama admits there is no evidence machines being tampered with during the election, he says he was concerned that potential hacks could hamper the counting and affect the actual election process. And then he says, reality, multiple intelligence community assessments before and after the election consistently showed no credible reporting of Russian intent or capability to do what President Obama alleged. And here is, this is the IC, was prepared to produce an assessment, per the president's request. So this is the intelligence community. They know, they've had their instructions, and they are per the president's request that pulls together the information we have on the tools Moscow used and actions it took to influence the 2016 election. And now, here was Obama on December the 16th, 2016, and he held a news conference. So remember, at this stage, no intelligence community assessment has been made. And here he's saying, what we've simply said is the facts, which are that based on uniform intelligence assessments, the Russians were responsible for hacking the DNC. A lie? No, there's no uniform intelligence assessment. He's deliberately obfuscating here. We're saying that the two key intelligence agencies, the FBI and the NSA, had low confidence in attributing the DNC hack to Russia. And that as a consequence, it is important for us to review all elements of that and make sure that we are preventing that kind of interference through cyber attacks in the future. And then now with respect to how this thing unfolded last year, let's just go through the facts pretty quickly. At the beginning of the summer, we're alerted to the possibility that the DNC has been hacked, and I immediately order law enforcement as well as our intelligence teams to find out everything about it, investigate it thoroughly, to brief the potential victims of this hacking, to brief on a bipartisan basis the leaders of both the House and the Senate and the relevant intelligence committees. But none of that happened. As I say, the FBI did not conduct an investigation. They took the word of an interested party, which was CrowdStrike, which was paid by the DNC. And once we had clarity and certainty around that, around what in fact had happened, we publicly announced that in fact Russia had hacked into the DNC. And finally, I think it's worth pointing out that the information was already out. It was in the hands of WikiLeaks, so that was going to come out no matter what. What I was concerned about in particular was making sure that that wasn't compounded by potential hacking that could hamper vote counting. So there he is, he's saying that. What I was concerned about was making sure that that wasn't compounded by potential hacking that could hamper vote counting, affect the actual election process itself. The very thing that the intelligence community that told him could not happen. They said it over and over again. There's no way that anybody could hack into the voting machine, into the voting infrastructure. And no way that could the vote count be affected by a hack. And there he is saying, what I was concerned about in particular was making sure that that wasn't compounded by potential hacking that could hamper vote counting, affect the actual election process itself. This is Obama, December the 16th, 2016. And so in early September, when I saw President Putin in China, I felt that the most effective way to ensure that that didn't happen was to talk to him directly and tell him to cut it out. And there were going to be some serious consequences if he didn't. And in fact, we did not see further tampering of the election process. So he says, well, I told him to cut it out. And therefore, since we saw nothing further, my word really, carried, which means the Russians were obviously guilty. If they were doing it before and then I threatened Putin and then they stopped doing it, means that's proof that the Russians were doing it, rather than you just made this stuff up out of whole cloth. And then we now come to the intelligence community assessment, the January the 6th, 2017 intelligence community assessment. The Obama administration shares the unclassified ICA with the public. It falsely alleges, based in part on further information that had come to light since the election, that Putin directed an effort to help President Trump defeat Hillary Clinton. So this is the first time anyone had ever said any of this, other than obviously it's in the Steele dossier. But this is the first time the intelligence community made this declaration that the Russians interfered in the 2016 election to help Trump. This is after they got essentially their instructions from Obama. They were going to publish their presidential daily brief on December the 9th, and then suddenly that was canceled, and they were told to come up with a completely new finding. And this is the complete new finding. And this further information is later confirmed to be the Steele dossier. it alleges the further information that came to light is the Steele dossier. That's where it comes from. The whole idea that Russia was interfering in the 2016 election to secure the election for Donald Trump. It comes from the Steele dossier, and it comes from Christopher Steele, who had been paid handsomely by Hillary Clinton. He was also paid handsomely by the FBI. Obviously an interested party, but the intelligence community just simply unquestioningly relies on him and then lies about it to pretend that he didn't rely on Christopher Steele. The assessment also suppresses intelligence from before and after the election, showing Russia lacked intent and capability to hack the 2016 election. Deceives the American public by claiming that the IC did not assess the impact of Russian activities. Reality, the IC did in fact assess for impact. The unpublished December presidential daily briefing stated clearly that Russia did not impact the election through cyber hacks on the election. And then here, and then this is also assesses that Russia was responsible for leaking data from DNC and DCC, while failing to mention that the FBI and NSA previously expressed low confidence in this attribution. This is, and now here then is that January the 6th, 2017 ICA assessment. And there it is. Russian efforts to influence the 2016 US presidential election represent the most recent expression of Moscow's long-standing desire to undermine the US-led liberal democratic order, but these activities demonstrated a significant escalation in directness, level activity, and scope of effort compared to previous operations. And then we assess Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered an influence campaign in the summer of 2016 aimed at the US presidential election. Russia's goals were to undermine public faith in the US democratic process, denigrate Secretary Clinton. So this is, as I say, this is the new thing, which there'd been nothing in the previous months in the ICAs and in the views of the intelligence community, to denigrate Secretary Clinton and harm her electability and potential presidency. This is obviously coming from the Steele dossier, because it was Christopher Steele in his dossier that was putting out this this story about how the Russians were interfering in the election in order to help Trump and to destroy Clinton and harm her electability and potential presidency. We further assess Putin and the Russian government developed a clear preference for President-elect Trump. We have high confidence in these judgments based on a body of intelligence reporting and the public behavior of senior Russian officials and state-controlled media. So just to note that this wasn't in any way a proper intelligence community assessment. An intelligence community assessment is one that is based on eliciting all of the information from all of the intelligence agencies and based on the experts, the resident experts at each of the intelligence agencies. So if you go to the FBI, then you expect to get the input from FBI's Russia experts. You get the views of the CIA, you get the consensus of the Russia experts. Same with it's the NSA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, whatever. You know that, and then you cull all of this information, or you not cull, you collate all this information, and then you draft your ICA. This isn't what happened. This was Brennan and Clapper and a few of their hand-picked figures who already had the conclusion, and we saw that was the conclusion of that December the 9th meeting. They had the conclusion, and then they wrote an assessment that would reach that conclusion. We further assess Putin and Russian government developed a clear preference for President-elect Trump. We have high confidence in these judgments based on the body of intelligence reporting and the public behavior of senior Russian officials and state-controlled media. We also assess Putin and the Russian government aspire to help President-elect Trump's election chances when possible by discrediting Secretary Clinton and publicly contrasting her unfavorably to him. CIA and FBI have high confidence in this judgment based on sensitive information not included in this version of the assessment. Now, what was this sensitive information? Well, that's a puzzle. The sensitive information was the Steele dossier, based on sensitive information. Not included in this assessment, and because they lied about it. They already knew that the Steele dossier was acquiring a notoriety, so they lied about their reliance on the Steele dossier. The NSA has moderate confidence in this judgment based on the same sensitive information. So there's moderate confidence. So they weren't exactly overwhelmed by the Steele dossier. NSA's confidence in this judgment would be elevated to high with additional corroborating sources. That's what a polite way of putting it. Well, we'd like to believe the Steele dossier, but we'd kind of like some corroborating evidence, please. And then Putin most likely wanted his intelligence services to discredit Secretary Clinton because he has blamed her since 2011 for inciting mass protests against his regime in late 2011 and early 2012, and holds a grudge for her comments he almost certainly saw as disparaging him, judging from press reporting. So this is coming from the Steele dossier, and it's entirely speculative. I mean, it's based on absolutely nothing. Putin has never talked about this. He's never said that he has any particular dislike for Hillary Clinton, and he certainly has never brought up her stance in 2011. And then the Russian Foreign Intelligence of SVR and the General Staff, blah, blah, both conducted cyber operations against targets associated with the 2016 presidential election, including targets associated with both major U.S. political parties. As you see, it all becomes self-referential. I mean, it all goes back to this alleged hack of the DNC server, and then the Steele dossier. As I said, this is no evidence whatsoever. This is what they ran with. This is what Obama instructed his people to run with for the next, year, 10 years, because we're still living with RussiaGate. We have high confidence in this judgment. We assess with high confidence that the GRU and the Guccifer 2.0 persona and DC leaks to release U.S. victim data obtained in cyber operations publicly and in exclusive to media outlets, and that the GRU was directed to pass material it collected to WikiLeaks, again, based on exactly nothing. If the NSA, which is the agency that is tasked with looking at and investigating hacks, if they don't have anything and then they kind of sheepishly rely on the Steele dossier, it means they just don't have any evidence that Russia hacked the DNC server, as Bill Binney pointed out, to exfiltrate that amount of information from a server. That would take quite a long time. There's no way in the world that the NSA could miss such a lengthy exfiltration. And then we assessed that the GRU was directed to pass material to DNC, to WikiLeaks. Of course, they always have this. And we assessed the Russian government also passed to WikiLeaks the material collected on a senior Democratic Party official. And that you see. Now, what's interesting is, of course, what happens now. As I discussed in my live stream yesterday, there are a number of criminal statutes that could be used against the co-conspirators within the Obama administration. We'll see whether they do get used. But I think what's most important is not to get bogged down in these details which the media want to get into, say, oh, well, Obama never said that Russia hacked into the voting machine. So this is so outrageous. Why, because he never said, he never claimed that. That isn't the issue. Obama orchestrated the RussiaGate hoax. Obama orchestrated all of the key claims of RussiaGate, namely that Russia had hacked into the DNC server and then extracted that information and passed it on to WikiLeaks, that there were Russian agents working with Trump, and that the Steele dossier was credible and showed clear evidence that Trump was a creature of the Kremlin. This was all. There could have been a perfectly normal, respectable presidential daily briefing, which has the usual Russophobia and so on. You would expect that. There's nothing special about that. But it would have been a normal daily briefing that would have been presented on December the 9th. That was canceled, and instead we got this wild conspiracy involving Russia and Trump, and it came on the direct orders of Barack Obama. And I think it's very important to keep that in mind as the media now continue to obfuscate and talk about, oh, Trump's conspiracy theories. This is a conspiracy. Trump is calling into question the integrity of the intelligence agencies as if they had any integrity to speak of. So anyway, thank you very much for today. And tomorrow, Thursday, it'll be time for the live stream, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Please join me. And until then, good night. Goodbye. See you.